Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Please feel free to contact us if you have a concern or a suggestion. Just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit us on the website, jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to write for the website on an issues dealing with your own personal journey or that about dealing with aging and the spirituality of aging, we have people writing for us from all over the country and sometimes the world. So please feel free, just let me know. And if your organization or company or whatever would like to be a sponsor of some of these programs, also just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. We're in the middle of, getting ready to end the Torah cycle. And even like last week, we had an exploration of some of the parenting and trauma aspects of the book of Genesis, but we're going to return to the book of Genesis. We return to the book of Genesis this week, with this very, very interesting new or recent book called Fan Fiction on the book of Genesis. The author who's joining us, Sarah Rosenson. And Sarah, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're just up the street, from where I live. So no time zones, another Jersey girl. How you doing?
I am great. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate that.
Okay, this is a very interesting book. We'll talk about its structure, but what motivated you to do so? Full disclosure, I've known Sarah off and on for a few years. Always very, very involved intellectually, social justice wise. Were you stuck on Route 70 one day and said, I've nothing better to do because it's all under construction, so I think I'll write something on the book of Genesis. What got you to do this?
No, the journey did not start on Route 70.
Very few do.
Although I have been stuck there, yes. Now, I think the journey to this book really started when I got my master's degree in Jewish studies 20 years ago. I had been a lawyer. I practiced law for a decade, but then made a change in my life and became a teacher instead. And along that way, I got my master's degree in Jewish studies. In my master's program, I took a class called Teaching the Bible. And I loved that class. It was wonderful. The professor taught us about using midrash, bibliodrama, paintings of biblical scenes in classes. And I created a curriculum on Joseph and his brothers for that class. That was my final project. And I did an independent study with the same professor where I created a curriculum on Abraham and Isaac. Both of these curricula are for adults. And then I was given the chance to teach those curricula and create and teach more classes in various contexts for high school students and adults. And what I didn't realize at the time is every time I created a new class, a new course, I was actually preparing to write a chapter of this book, because what's in the book are really some of the things we talk about in my classes. And I teach online now in various lifelong learning programs around the country. I teach locally at the JCC and a couple of independent living retirement communities. And some of my classes are based on the Bible. The other important part, I think, of the journey to this book, I do want to mention, is my family background. I was raised by two Jewish parents who had no interest in practicing Judaism, and we didn't. We did not stay home from school on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, no Shabbat observance of any kind, no membership in a synagogue, no attendance at a synagogue, no Hebrew school. So when I started exploring my Jewish identity and Judaism on my own as an adult, and I came to the texts, like the book of Genesis, I opened them and I started reading. And I was reading fresh. I was reading clean. I had no preconceptions. I think people who grow up steeped in these things are also steeped in the centuries of commentary and interpretation that are layered onto the text, like like barnacles. And so I never had the experience growing up of having a rabbi or a parent or a Hebrew school teacher say to me, this story is in the Torah to teach us the following lesson. Or our community traditionally feels that this character in the story is a good guy and this character is a bad guy. I never had that. So I made my own conclusions. I came up with my own ideas, my own questions. And the relevance of that is that sometimes they are different than the conclusions of the received wisdom of the tradition. So I think that's another important part of the journey to this book.
So, I mean, it's very Jewish to come up with your own questions and interpretations. We've been doing it for a couple thousands of years and still do it. So you're in the chain of a sacred tradition to ask the questions, to doubt, and to seek different ways of approaching this. You mentioned the structure of the book. You tell a story. You mention the text, the key text, but you also give suggestions about how to interpret this let's say in a classroom with art or music or different ways. Just so somebody would say, okay, well, I got this. I read Genesis 3 and I got the image of the mythology of Adam and Eve and all that stuff. But give me an example of how you would then translate that story into, let's just say, art or music,
I can't really speak to music. I don't really know much about music, I have to say. But I have looked at a lot of paintings and sculptures of biblical scenes. And this book is really about the phenomenon of midrash, where you look at the text, you have a question about it, and you do something creative to answer that question, to fill in the gap that's left in the sacred, the canonical text itself. Usually we think of that in terms of writing. You write something that answers a question left open in the text. But I think if you're painting the scene or making a movie of the scene, that is another form of midrash. For instance, with Adam and Eve, one of the huge questions left open there, to my mind, is why did Adam eat the fruit? God told him directly, don't eat that fruit. And all it says in the Torah is we get some information from the narrator about why Eve ate it. And then it says, and she took of it and ate, and she handed it to her husband and he ate. That's it. There's no conversation. There's no discussion. The narrator gives us no insight into what Adam is thinking. So if you're a painter, before you can paint that moment, that incredibly famous moment in Western civilization, you have to decide, like, was he reaching out and saying to her, wait, give me a piece, share, I want some too? Or was he drawing back like in horror? What are you doing? He told us not to eat that. There are all different ways of imagining this. And you would have to answer some of those questions in your own mind as an artist before you put
No, it makes actually, the reason why I mentioned that, because one of our previous podcasts was a guy who wrote a book on the parenting and trauma aspects of Genesis. And we were talking about Genesis 3, which is my favorite chapter in Torah. And the passivity of Adam, who's very passive. I mean, just like you said, here, have a fruit. Now, why did you do that? Well, I want to make my wife happy. Yeah, but they told me I got to make my wife happy, et cetera, et cetera. The passivity of Adam, perhaps. There's a whole way you can interpret that, and the relationship of men and women. And did subsequent generations say, see, it's women's fault, so men who wrote this will portray an anti-feminist ideology? Who knows? We weren't there, and this text is quite an old text. But the ability and the paintings itself, because all of us have gone through, well, many of us probably have gone through the church groups and synagogue, the church paintings, etc., various museums. But a painting, like you just alluded to, a painting is midrash. Because okay, look at the painting. What do you see? So if you look, Sarah, at a text and Joe next to you looks at the same text, you may very well see two different things, which is why the bracha of let asok b'divrei Torah, let the text speak to you. That's why these types of books that you've written are so important for people to look at, because in essence, it's giving permission to people to do exactly what you just said you've done with your life. Look at the text, let it speak to you, come up with your own interpretation, which is extremely, extremely Jewish. Talk to me about your understanding of Noah, because you write about Noah, who's building the ark, and you sort of like say, well, why are all these people not saying, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's going on here?
Yeah, Noah is fascinating. And I think for me, the question really is he righteous? The narrator tells us he's righteous. That's why he and his family are chosen by God to be the people on the ark who survive this drastic, devastating flood. But there's a lot of things he could have done that he didn't do. He could have said to God, when God says, I'm going to wipe out all other living things on earth, what if instead you gave people a chance to repent, and only if they don't, then wipe them out? He could have said, what about all the innocent people? Which, of course, is exactly what Abraham says to God later. What about all the innocent people? Are you going to kill them too? How is that fair? How is that just? And even if you take it that every adult on the planet Earth, except Noah and his wife and sons and their wives, was evil to the core, what about the infants and the toddlers? And Noah didn't say any of these things. He didn't say to any of his neighbors, you know what? You should start building a boat because there's going to be a really, really big flood. So it's a little bit hard for me to take him as righteous, although the narrator says that he is. So I think it's a fascinating question. It also, of course, you have to ask, if you live in a generation where everyone is so evil that they deserve to be wiped out, how good do you have to be to look righteous by comparison? Maybe it's a low bar. Or maybe, actually, if you can maintain some goodness and some morality in a situation where everyone around you is horrible, maybe you really are a righteous person, very strong, very admirable. So I can see both sides of the argument, but I think it's a fascinating argument.
One of the issues that comes up in Torah and in the book of, well, in all the books, actually, is this idea of silence. Genesis 23 begins with, and Sarah died, right after Genesis 22, where Isaac is taken up to the mountain to be sacrificed. And the very, very next, Sarah dies. No explanation. The commentators have ruminated on this. Did she have a broken heart? Why didn't Abraham tell her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The idea of silence when Nadab and Avihu in Exodus are killed, Aaron's response is silence. What's, in your opinion, who teaches this, what's the value of silence in moments of like this? Or is there a value of silence?
Well, that's a great question, and I haven't thought about that head on, but I do think the first things that come to my mind are, as you mentioned, Noah and his silence. He didn't say to God, are you really going to kill all the innocent people along with all the bad people? And Abraham, when God says to him, kill your son, is silent. He doesn't say,
Are you? Yeah.
excuse me? Remember the conversation we had about Sodom and Gomorrah, where we decided that it's unjust to kill innocent people? Why would I kill my son? He's perfectly innocent. Why would you want that? That's unjust. He's silent. He's silent. And I think, to me, sometimes these silences are an opportunity for us to ask, why is this person being silent? And in fact, did this person have an obligation, a moral obligation, to speak up? And that's, a question that we all face all the time, really. Now, that's different from when you're talking about Aaron and his sons. That's a silence of grief, which is a different thing. But in these instances in Genesis, I think they give us an opportunity to ask, did this biblical character remain silent when they should have spoken up because something unethical was about to happen?
Sarah, in your understanding of the book of Genesis, your understanding of the God of Genesis, who kills innocent people, how do you begin to harmonize that biblical God with perhaps the God that you follow, adhere to, worship in 21st century suburban Philadelphia?
A great question. And it was interesting to me when I look back on having written a book about the first book of the Bible. You would think it would be about God. And I have to say, what I feel actually happened in this process is that I wrote a book about family, human family connections. And what I'm most fascinated about are the brothers, Isaac and Ishmael, and Jacob and Esau, and pairs of sisters and parents and children, and all these incredibly complicated relationships that exist in the families of the book of Genesis. And God's kind of a minor character. I mean, I understand the beginning of the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
He creates the whole world. I realize that's not a little thing.
Not
that's a big
exactly
thing.
a minor thing.
But that's not really what I was drawn to write about. And I would just say the God that is presented in the Bible, who's very anthropomorphic and makes decisions about who lives and who dies, really has very little to do with how I think of God if I'm thinking about theology. I can find places in the Bible that connect to my personal theology, but this book really was not about that.
The family oriented. I mean, when I teach the book of Genesis, we always go straight to the fact that this is a book of family dynamics. And it is a book of also the transition or the transformation of pathology from one generation to another generation to another generation, because that's exactly what happens in the patriarchal families on a whole variety of different levels. That's why, to me, the book of Genesis is just so powerful. People are living it every single day. You lined up every congregational rabbi in the world and say, well, do you see in your office these activities within your families? Everyone is going to say, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. There's great symbolism too, I think, that you and sometimes touch on. And I want to ask you a little bit about your interpretation of some of these themes, because there are themes. Abraham is called to leave the land, in Genesis 12, Lech Lecha. There's a theme throughout the Torah of leaving and going, moving forward, always searching. Why do you think that's a theme in the bulk of the Torah? We're always looking. We're always moving.
I think I would just say it represents, in the stories, in the narrative, there's physical movement and relocation. But I think it all can be a metaphor for how we are all moving and having to change and adapt to new things, and being pushed forward, sometimes whether we want it or not, our whole lives. I mean, our whole lives. So I do think that, I think that's partly why it's such a phenomenal work of literature, is because it feels real, partly because it's all about family, and the human ability to change. I mean, I think that's one of the big themes of the book of Joseph, the stories of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Um, and I think we can all read these stories in Genesis, and they are set in a different time and place, and there are marital structures that seem bizarre to us and things like that. But fundamentally, these are families, and these are people struggling to connect with each other, to deal with change in their lives, having to adapt,
So
just like us.
there's on the ability to adapt. One of the other motifs, and there are a series of motifs in the book of Genesis that reappear, but one of them is the famine. So you mentioned Joseph. Okay, to Joseph's brothers, famine in Canaan. Daddy sends him back. There's the reunion. There's a magnificent piece of literature towards the end of the book of Genesis of the reunion. There are famines in the land. We go into Egypt because of famine. What's the symbolism of that concept of famine? And do you think you could then transpose it? Are people today spiritually hungry and looking for sustenance, spiritual sustenance?
That is a fascinating question. That I have never
Well,
thought
that's why
about
I'm
like
asking
that.
you. As before we run out of time, I figure I'll give you a good softball question at the end.
um, the symbolism of famine. I think, in all honesty, I have a little trouble thinking of it as a symbol for the need for spiritual sustenance. I think that's a beautiful idea. But when I think of, like, there are various famines where Abraham or Isaac, go to some other place where they can get food, but they don't want they don't want people to know that their wife is their wife. They want people to think she's their sister because she's so beautiful, and they'll kill him to get her, and all that. And, like, sort of, this is what happens as a result of the famine. With Joseph, many things happen, including the saving of his family, along with the entire population of Egypt, from the famine. It's not lining up neatly for me to be a symbol of the need for spiritual sustenance, but maybe I'm just not thinking of it right.
This is the fun of talking about text. Okay. Because
yes,
we'll look at stuff in there and what pops into your mind. And there is no right or wrong. It speaks personally to a lot of where people are at particular periods of time. But I think the looking at various themes, which is why, by the way, I'll return back to one of the things you said at the beginning, why art is so important, because you can look at that painting, and maybe where you are that particular day will speak to you in a certain way. You could come back a month later and have a totally different experience. So as we've talked before in other classes, and I'm sure it comes up in your classes, that's why we do this every year, because go Shabbos morning and you'll sit and just study Torah, and a year from now you'll study the same passage, but you'll see it very, very differently because you're a very different person than you were.
And I think with the art, one thing that is really fun for me to think about is that you're absolutely right, Rabbi. Every time any one of us comes back to the same story, we're a different person and might see something new in that story. But it's also true, every single person who reads a text of a story imagines pictures of it in their mind. And when you look at paintings by several different artists of the same biblical scene, you see just how unique each of our minds is, because the pictures in my mind are nothing like the pictures in Rembrandt's mind, and those are nothing like the pictures in Caravaggio's mind. And when you line up several different pictures of the same biblical scene by different artists, you really see that clearly. And you know what? I just want to add here quickly, because I don't think I've said it yet. And you said there are no right answers. The fun is in the conversation. I should say, I think the thing that is different about my book is that each chapter ends with a long list of questions for the characters in the story. So questions for Isaac and Ishmael and Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and the whole gang. Not answers to those questions, but questions about what was the family relationship like at different points? What were they thinking at different points in the story that the narrator doesn't tell us? So the hope is anybody who reads a chapter of the book and sees all these questions for the characters in the story is going to come up with their own answers to the questions.
Which is why we go back to basically what you said at the very, very beginning. We'll go back to your own family of origin. You looked at this thing with no training and started to ask and question and question and question, which is really the essence of studying Torah. Just asking those questions. And the answer that you get at a certain age may be a different answer that you'll get at a different age, and that's okay. That's okay. Before I let you go, once again, just to make sure, fan fiction on the book of Genesis, a guide to close reading and creative writing on the Bible, available through the usual suspects, Sarah, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, the usual place.
Bookshop.org. Bookshop.org as well. Yes.
Good luck with the classes. Thank you very much. You'll be at the JCC in Cherry Hill, New Jersey on the day after Shoshana, the Monday, the 14th of September. And the people in our area will get all the publicity, and I'm sure you'll get your fan club there from many of the people who've studied with you before from the area. So continued success. I wish you good health, a good year. Stay healthy, most of all. Okay, Sarah, thank you very much.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for your time. We are grateful for your time of being with us. Again, if you'd like to make a comment or a suggestion, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. You'll find a very conveniently located button on the website. And if you'd like to support the work of these podcasts and Jewish Sacred Aging, please click on the donate button and follow the prompts. We're very, very grateful. If you or your organization would like to sponsor a series of these programs, again, just please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Lubetkin Media Services Company corporate international headquarters in beautiful downtown Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lebedkin. To all of you, take care of yourself. Stay safe, stay healthy, but most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom.